Today, we're diving into one of the Bible's most, let's say, challenging books to find a message of hope that's surprisingly clear. We're going to be exploring the presence of Christ in the often dark and, frankly, violent pages of the book of Judges. So let's just kick things off with a question that feels like it could have been written this morning. What actually happens when a whole society loses its moral compass? When doing what feels right to you becomes the only rule? Well, the book of Judges is basically a raw, unfiltered case study answering that exact question. All right, so this book picks up right after the time of Joshua, but it is no story of victory. It's really a tragedy. It documents the catastrophic consequences that happen when a nation just forgets its God. And you have to understand, this isn't just some dusty old history lesson. It's a timeless warning. The whole narrative spirals down and down and down, showing us in really vivid detail why humanity is so desperate for a righteous king to lead the way. And this downward spiral? It wasn't random. Nope. It followed this predictable, destructive pattern that just got worse and worse each time it repeated. It's a pattern that feels kind of familiar, doesn't it? Almost like a personal addiction cycle, but played out on a huge national scale. Let's take a look at that cycle. So here it is in 4 steps. First, sin. The people walk away from God. Second, oppression. They get crushed by some foreign nation. Third, they cry out to God for help. And finally, God, in his mercy, sends a deliverer, a judge to save them. But the key word here, you gotta catch this, is temporary. The peace never, ever lasted. You see, even in the middle of all this rebellion, all this failure, God's mercy is still on display. He hears their cries, and he sends these figures, these judges, to come and rescue them. Which, brings us to the most important question of all. Were these human heroes, these judges, were they enough to break the cycle for good? Could they actually provide the lasting peace and righteousness that the people so desperately needed? Well, let's take a look at the resume, shall we? We'll start with Gideon. God calls him to lead this massive victory, but he's so full of doubt, we first find him hiding in a wine press, basically begging God for sign after sign to reassure him. Then you've got Jephthah, a mighty warrior for sure. He delivers Israel, but his story is forever stained by this foolish, tragic vow that costs him everything and leads to a horrifying family outcome. And of course, Samson. The guy gifted by God with supernatural physical strength, but he had absolutely no moral strength or self-control to back it up. His life was just one compromise after another, all fueled by lust and revenge. The point is, it's crystal clear, human saviors, even the ones God picks, are flawed. They're not enough. So, if the judges weren't the answer, what was the real problem? Well, the book itself actually tells us what the issue is, with stunning clarity, especially as you get to the end. This verse right here, it's like the book's closing statement, its final diagnosis, and it's repeated to make sure we don't miss the point. The chaos wasn't just a series of bad decisions. It was a symptom of something much deeper. Here's the bottom line. Society was falling apart because there was no righteous king. There was no true authority to lead the people in God's ways. And without that leadership, society just defaulted to chaos, to moral anarchy. And this is where the whole story turns. Every failure, every flawed hero, every desperate cry for a leader in the book of Judges. It's like it's creating a silhouette, an outline that is perfectly, and I mean perfectly, filled by only one person, Jesus Christ. I mean, the contrast is it's stark. On one side, you have the human judges, flawed, temporary, totally unable to fix the real problem. And on the other side, you have Christ, perfect, eternal, bringing a final, complete salvation. He is the perfect judge that the heroes of Israel could only ever hint at. So how does he do it? Well, he's the perfect judge who doesn't just make rulings, but actually is righteousness itself. He is the true king who doesn't just sit on a throne, but establishes real, lasting justice. And he is the final deliverer who saved us not from some temporary enemy, but from our ultimate enemy, sin. And that's the great promise of the New Testament, right? The judges saved Israel from the Philistines or the Midianites, temporary problems. But Jesus came to save his people from their sins, the very root of the problem that started that whole downward spiral in Judges in the first place. Okay, so this is all fascinating ancient theology, but what does it actually mean for us, right here, right now? Why does this book,
thousands of years old, still matter.
Here are the big takeaways. First, Judges reminds us that sin is never neutral. It always leads to decay and chaos. Second, it shows that all of us, if we're just left to ourselves, desperately need a righteous king. Third, it reveals God's relentless mercy, even when we fail again and again. And finally, it teaches us that true freedom isn't doing whatever we want, but joyfully submitting to Christ's perfect rule. Let me put it another way. Imagine a city with no government, no laws, no authority. At first, you might think that sounds like freedom, right? But it would very quickly turn into absolute chaos. That's the world of the Book of Judges.
But now, imagine a perfect king, someone wise and just and good who enters that city and restores true order, security, and peace. That is what Christ does for the human heart and for the world.
And all of that leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. It's a question the Book of Judges forces every single one of us to ask. In the kingdom of your own life, who's sitting on the throne? Is it you doing what's right in your own eyes, or is it the true and righteous king?